You have a TV?
No. I just like to read the TV guide. Read the TV guide. You don't need a TV.
Television addict! Television addict! Television addict!
Hello, welcome to TV Guidance Counselor. It is Wednesday. It is time for a brand new episode of the show. As always, I am Ken Reed, your TV Guidance Counselor, newly back from Los Angeles, newly reinvigorated due to a fine West Coast trip. I come bearing a suitcase full of fantastic episodes with amazing people while I was out on the West Coast, and I cannot think of a better way to kick off these episodes than with today's guest, Ann Magnuson. Ann is easily one of the smartest and most interesting people I've ever had the pleasure of talking to. You most likely know her from a wide variety of things. She's an actress, was on shows like Anything But Love, played Lillian Munster, was also the unfortunate victim of David Bowie's Vampire in the beginning of The Hunger. She's also an artist, has a key role in Club 57, really great writer, and a fantastic musician. She was in the band Bongwater, also put out one of my favorite records of the 90s, The Love Show, and has a brand new record out called Dream Girl, which you can get at annmagnuson.com. You can even get it signed. Highly recommend it. I will put up links to all of that as well as her writing on tvguidancecounselor.com. You can also, as I said, find it at annmagnuson.com. We talked TV, we talked art. This is a fantastic episode. As I said, one of the great things for me is getting to meet and talk to people I admire that are smart and fascinating people, and Ann is a prime example of that kind of person. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode of TV Guidance Counselor with my guest, Ann Magnuson.
TV is my friend, and it has been always there for me in time of need.
Ann Magnuson, how are you?
Hey, Ken.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, it's very exciting. I have an interesting history with TV Guide.
With TV Guide specifically? I know you have an interesting history with television.
Well, yes. Well, I watched it a lot growing up because of being a boomer, and my mother had it on constantly as a babysitter. We actually did not subscribe to TV Guide, but our neighbors, the Joneses, did.
You were keeping up with them?
In ways that are too cliched to count. But they had a subscription, so I would go over there. I knew when it arrived, and I go over there. I went over there anyway to play with the kids, and there was several families. We all grew up together and kind of had it takes a village situation.
This is in West Virginia?
Yeah, Charleston, West Virginia, where I grew up, and I got to the point where I knew when this arrived, and I would go over specifically to look at and particularly the fall preview.
Yes.
I was very excited and to look at the pictures and see what was going to happen. But I loved reading the TV Guide, and I remember a couple times going over there and nobody was there, and nobody locked their doors back then. Yeah. So I would just go in and go into their TV room,
just read the guide,
and read TV Guide, and kind of hope that they didn't show up. But if they did, it really wouldn't maybe be that terrible, but they never did, and the few times I had to surreptitiously go over.
Did you make up an excuse when you were going over there every week, or were you like, I'm here to see the kids, I'm just going to go in here for a bit, or would you kind of
Well, I would go over there every day. I mean, we all went to each other's houses every day, so it was a daily occurrence for the most part, but yes, I would kind of, I'd
get a reason to go over there.
Well, it would be to play, but then I'd say, I'm just going to, I would pretend to be
checking something. I have to check something for my mom.
I would pretend to be engaged in something else, but really being reading the TV Guide.
And would you plan what you were going to watch at home that week? Like take kind of mental notes of, I got to watch this Thursday? Or
Yes, but I knew the TV schedule really well, and they printed it in the local paper. Right. So I was all over that.
But you didn't get the detail in the local paper, and that was the thing. You could say, what episode is this? Is it a repeat?
And these fabulous color pictures in the glossy paper. pages at the beginning, particularly for the fall preview, because then you would know what was coming up.
Yeah, and that was the first time, and when I tell this to people younger than us now, that sounds absolutely crazy to them, but the first time you knew what shows were going to be on was 2 weeks before they started, or if your favorite show was canceled, it was 2 weeks before it was supposed to start, and it would be in that fall preview.
Yes. I remember even earlier when I couldn't read as well, I mean, really young, you wouldn't know until the special movie, and then it would appear, and I'm like, oh my God!
Yeah, I had no idea this was going to be on. Oh yeah, I had friends who would get the TV guide out and go flip to that movie section, and they'd set an alarm clock and be like, I got to get up at 2 a.m. on Saturday night if I want to watch Creature from the Black Lagoon, because it's my only chance to see it.
Have you heard of the zine called Psychotronic?
Yes, yeah, Michael J. Weldon did Psychotronic? Yes.
Well, when I first went to New York in '78 on a work-study program where I worked at an uptown theater, but spent all my nights downtown, and then eventually moved downtown and spent all my days and nights downtown, including running this club called Club 57, which parenthetically is going to have a retrospective of all the activities and the artists and the films that were shown there and the whole ball of wax at the Museum of Modern Art.
Because that's Keith Haring.
Keith Haring, Kenny Scharf, John Sex, Sing Kwang Chi, many people who have gotten attention, whose names are known, but this show is going to also focus and highlight people whose names are not known, whose work has not been seen, and there's a treasure trove of stuff that's been discovered or that we knew about but just didn't get its due at the time because it wasn't stylistically in step with what the culture was into at that moment of time. So that's exciting. That's going to be opening in the fall of 2017 and running for about 6 months.
Oh, that's great. We'll have to definitely check that out. And that's at MoMA?
MoMA, in New York. But at the time, I don't know when he started Psychotronic.
He started in 79, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. It was around the time that the Cramps were still in New York.
Yes. And they played at Irving Plaza at Club 57, which was connected to the club. It's too complicated to get into now. But I remember Michael coming to Club 57 when we first started getting it open in that particular guise. It had been open for about a year, but a group of us infiltrated.
Made it your own?
Yes, made it our own and took over. And he was one of the first members. And I remember signing up for, I think it was pretty cheap, if anything, for the newsletter that came in your mailbox. And I think at first it was very, very simple, and then it got more because like
elaborate. 2-page typed just
yes, and then it
back
became more pages with a stable.
Yeah, and then he did the first video guide, I think in like '83. The book, that was the Bible for so many of us.
Yes, but I remember being excited when that came in the mail, and consulting that for what incredible, wacky, retro, horror and exploitation films were available, usually on Channel 9.
Yes, Channel 9 or PIX occasionally would have some of those stuff too. They would do Shocktober, I think, at that time. They would do a whole bunch of those down there.
But when I was growing up and all through the 80s, because there were only 3 channels, sometimes 4 with PBS, you were a hostage to whatever they decided to show. So I've talked about this with other friends of mine, the difference between my generation, I don't know about yours because you're younger, but certainly the millennials, is that we were very much exposed to the films and the arts and the artwork and the entertainers of our parents' generation.
Absolutely.
And the news was better, and history shows and documentaries. So I think we got a very good education, not exclusively from television, but certainly because of television. I actually don't feel quite as bad about the amount of TV I watched as a kid.
Same here. I mean, I think I was the last generation that was still able to take advantage of that whole history of entertainment and the world that you got at television. Once the year 2000 hit, they pretty much stopped airing stuff that was more than 5 years old.
Yeah,
because
that was sad.
And I think we benefited from the fact that stuff was just cheap to air. But it was good to be like, you could see all these amazing movies, and you'd watch Looney Tunes that referenced cast all these actors from the 40s, but those were made for adults to be shown in theaters, but we're getting this education from them.
Yes.
And I was very into a show called Night Flight that was on USA
yes.
Network, and saw a lot of those like atomic scare films, and I think, was it called Heavy Petting? I think you were in a movie about like the a lot of those like sex ed movies from the 50s.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, and they would show those and that kind of stuff, and you can't stumble on that stuff now like we could, but you can find it if you already know to look for it, and I don't think kids do that now.
Maybe not, but I know from my internet rabbit hole adventures, I will come across things that I wasn't looking for, but came to me because one thing leads to another, to another, to another, to another. And last night, I actually found something that I'd never heard about, and it's a little embarrassing because it seems like it's something, quote-unquote, hip people should know about.
It's called Citizen Kane.
Well, there's a story about that. I'll finish this one. It's called The Space Lady.
Oh, I don't know The Space Lady.
And she's this DIY street performer who was a hippie back in the day, and she lived with this guy who was a draft dodger to avoid the Vietnam War and then the FBI, and so they lived underground, and she became a busker and a street performer because he couldn't
get a real job.
He couldn't get a real job, and he was really paranoid, and she now, I think she moved to Boston. They moved
That's
to
where
Boston
they come.
at one point, but also lived in San Francisco.
Yeah.
So there's really good videos of her. And I've been writing these blog posts from Magnet magazine online to help promote the CD.
Yeah.
And of course I've become much more ambitious with each one, so they're pretty dense. But the finale was supposed to be just a few dream sequences that I liked, and then I discovered all these other things.
Yeah.
It's this multi-layered, dense-packed blog about dreams and dream sequences in films, and I was going to end it with American Bandstand clip of the Electric Prunes playing.
Yes.
I had too much to dream last night, and last night I had told my husband John, well, let's just look at it, so because he hadn't seen it, and I said, you've got to see this, mostly because you've got to hear Dick Clark say about the song, it's a gassy thing.
It's always funny when he would try to throw in lingo.
Yes.
Even though he was like two years older than the kids at that point. But yeah, it's
it was
a
always
gassy
hard
thing.
to tell just how old he was, but he was so much more clean cut and very smooth.
Yeah.
Came from radio, I guess, right? So
Yeah.
He really was he was made for television. Made for TV. But we watched that, but he's very good at going down rabbit holes, internet rabbit holes. He found the Space Lady doing a cover of it.
Really?
And the video is so great. I don't know who made it, but it's so spectacular. I thought, oh my God, that's what I have to end this whole 14-week-long blog dream extravaganza with.
The Space Lady, she found you at that point.
She found me.
Yeah.
And then I was watching all these other clips of her playing her little Casio just on the street in parks. And I was so inspired. It's like, oh my God, DIY can work. It doesn't have to exhaust you because you can never make any money.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, all that outsider art type stuff that in the 80s got way more, like with Incredibly Strange Music and the research stuff and people like Wesley Willis and all that kind of stuff. But part of that was, I think, because people had access to video cameras that we never had access to before. And if a gatekeeper at a TV station didn't choose to cover it, you couldn't find footage of it. And that is one of the great things about now, is that people can do professional recordings of these people who would have just been sort of lost in time, or can at least digitize things.
But she had actually quit making music, and then some guy wrote a book, I don't remember the name of it now, heralding her, and she realized she could have another life. So I think that she digitalized her cassette tapes. But what I found so inspiring was the video of her just being on a sidewalk, doing it so simplistically, but so profoundly cosmic.
She wasn't phoning it in, like she was into it in that era. It wasn't, she was playing like she was in front of 1,000 people. It was like the same kind
Not
of...
really.
No?
She was performing it for just an audience of one. And that's the true art.
Right,
True art is performed for an audience of one, which is the cosmic consciousness.
Right.
And then the rest of us, because that's what's the most compelling thing about art, is that it connects us all up like that. We go, oh my God, I really love this.
Right. It's that shared experience thing
Yes.
that we all,
Yeah,
you
so
know,
she's my new spirit
the space
animal.
lady is your new spirit animal?
Yes.
Yeah, it makes sense that you would go to Boston if she started in San Francisco. There was, I learned this recently, that Harvard Square was the ground zero for hitchhiking in America.
Oh, yeah.
So it was where everybody went to get everywhere. It was like the Grand Central Station for hitchhiking.
Oh, yeah.
So a lot of people ended up either in Boston or in San Francisco at the end of whatever crisscross journey they had.
Yes, that's interesting.
Which I had no idea of until my dad was telling me that his mother wouldn't let him go there in the 60s because of all the hippies hanging around who were just all thumbing a ride.
Well, back to television, I remember my dad sat my brother, who's 2 years younger, down in front of the TV and myself and said, I want you to watch this. And it was a Mike Wallace, or was it Morley Safer, special on the hippie youth movement.
Like a scare film?
Sort of. It was really early on. And my dad, I want you to watch this and
Stay away from these
stay
kids.
away from this. Well, of course, it had the opposite effect.
Oh, absolutely.
It was just like, whoa,
I didn't even know this
hippie.
was a thing. Yeah.
Well, we'd see them hitchhiking even in West Virginia. There was a lot. There were not a lot, but enough that came through West Virginia
Right.
for the back to the land movement, and we would always flash peace signs at them.
Right.
Through the back window. We loved flashing peace signs, hippies, and down the street from us. And I think this was around 1967 or 68, no later than that. Our neighbors at the end of the street had a niece, I believe it was a niece, who got married in their backyard in a hippie wedding where they blew soap bubbles instead of threw rice. And I remember the neighborhood families,
Yep.
the Joneses, the Magnusons and the McAwees, the moms and the kids, because it was in the afternoon, I think, sat on the embankment on the opposite side of the street from them to watch this whole thing going on.
Like, this is the craziest thing we've ever seen. Like, can you believe we're seeing this kind of thing?
I don't know if it was presented as this is a crazy thing, but it was presented, for me, it was, this is a very magical thing.
Right. This is interesting and different.
Yeah, there's a lot of photos online of the hippie wedding that the singer Donovan had.
Oh, yeah.
And it looked like that.
Oh, interesting. It's odd that, these things were captured in a way where it was presented to you as a scare thing, sort of a scared straight thing almost, but has the exact opposite effect. And I think that happens less often now because youth movements aren't as cohesive. Like the last one seems to be probably like hip hop was probably the last youth movement that was a thing, and now it's so fractured.
Yeah.
There's almost nothing that you can show a younger kid to be like, stay away from this thing, and because there's nothing to show them almost.
Well, there is Coachella, and there's all the ODs from
True.
raves, and then there's also a very fascinating documentary we just watched called Freeload about the millennials who ride the trains.
Oh, I've heard of that. Is it good?
Yes.
That sounds
Because
interesting.
it's made by a guy who ran the trains, or rode the trains.
But again, it's a very old sort of beatnik thing.
Very much so. Very
Which is
much
very strange how it
There's
comes
a lot of
around.
alcohol involved.
I'm sure.
And
Yeah, like most
just-
youth movements.
Yes. I think that what I was attracted to is certainly with the little hippie wedding that was down the street, although they could have been on LSD,
Right.
who knows. But there wasn't a nefarious element to it yet.
Right. It wasn't like bikers and that like violent.
No, although it was that, and it certainly became very perverted by speed,
Yeah.
mostly, and certainly the Altamont. But there was a moment early on where it had a quality that was more about fairies and peace and love, and which I think was the first impulse,
But then I think as things get spread out and people adopt the sort of superficial pieces, you start to get elements that are there for sort of the wrong reason, I guess, or for a less ideological reason, maybe.
Yes, and also that life in general is composed of these two energies, the yin and the yang, and sometimes it can be the dark and the light,
Right.
or the negative and the positive, and
Things go out of balance occasionally.
things get unbalanced. Yes.
Have you ever seen the final episode of Dragnet
Is that the blue?
with Blue Boy?
Yes. Oh,
yeah.
gosh,
That's all I
yes.
could think of there was that.
Yes.
That is the quintessential, very straight person from the previous generation writing what they think the
Yes.
youth are doing. And that fascinated me.
Yes.
That made me go, I need to go to Los Angeles. This looks interesting.
Everybody who grew up, who was my age, knew about that Blue Boy episode. Loved it, and particularly if it showed up on TV, you ended up on the phone calling up everybody.
It's
Blue
on.
Boy's on.
It's on. Yeah, where he ODs on LSD, which I don't think anyone's ever done.
Well, they did a lot of things that were that ended up killing themselves. I mean,
True.
Diane Linkletter.
Oh, yeah?
And I think it actually is a very dangerous thing and shouldn't be played with. I remember I went to a party. Well, it was actually an afternoon sort of a barbecue that Kenny Scharf invited me to, and it was at Ed Ruscha's, the artist Ed Ruscha.
Mm-hmm.
No, it was at it was in Malibu, and it had all these people there. That it ended up that Kenny was saying, "Oh, it's a party for me," and it wasn't. It ended up like we ended up crashing.
You were crashing.
Which I felt a little uncomfortable with, but they were very gracious, and Ed always is. And we were sitting, and my mother was with me. It was my mother and myself and Kenny, some other people. And we were sitting with Timothy Leary, who
Wow.
was there. And my mom was just talking to him, and she said, "Well, who are you?" And he said, "I'm Tim," and they were just talking away. And she finally said, "Well, wait a minute. What do you do?" Oh, no, I know it. It was like he was introducing himself as I'm Tim. And she says, "Well, what do you do?" And she says, "I'm a scientist." He says, "I'm a scientist." She
Yeah.
says, "Really?" Oh, very Southern kind of like.
Yeah.
"Well, tell me more. That's fascinating." And he talked, and she says, like, "Wait a minute. What's your last name?" "Timothy Leary." She goes, "Oh, I always blamed you and the Beatles for getting my kids into drugs."
And he probably thanked her for that. Yeah, I mean, I think that once you started seeing the dark side of stuff, and the Diane Linkletter thing was the cultural huge thing, because Art Linkletter was America's sweetheart's not the right term for him, but sort of an America's dad kind of character.
Oh, I loved his show.
And yeah, and he was the
Kids
pitch
say the
man for
darndest
everything.
thing.
Yeah, everybody loved him. And it was a huge, huge scandal for people that his daughter, she had a bad trip and jumped out the window, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, psychedelics, absolutely. Can I say the word?
Yeah, say whatever
Fuck
you want.
you up.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
They can fuck you up, and
Yeah.
that's why I don't get anywhere near ayahuasca, which
Yeah.
now the new generation, people are doing that
Yeah.
right and
I
left.
have a lot of friends who are all up talking about how great that is. And I'm like, everything you've described sounds terrible to
It
me.
can be, I suppose it can be great. I'm just not interested in being in that place for 10 to 12 hours
Yeah.
and vomiting and shitting. And
Yeah, and
Also,
screaming
I-
and crying.
Also,
and
I know from, I mean, there's other ways you can go through that process.
Yeah, yeah.
I feel like because of the dreams I have every night, I'm on an ayahuasca trip
Yeah.
constantly. And I kind of have gotten my brain chemistry somewhere where I don't want to mess it
Right.
up.
It's perfect as it is.
Although
Yeah.
it is tempting, but I'd rather read about other people's.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat.
Also, I know from the people who I do meditation and yoga with that this fella who was brought up in India, he came into town and did Ayurvedic medicine and Ayurvedic healing sessions with massage and body work. And I asked him if he was working on anybody, because I knew that these same circles, and ayahuasca really became quite a rage during that time. This was several years ago, and I know it still is, but at the time it was on my mind. And I asked him about it, and he said, "Oh yeah, I've got quite a few people who I'm working on who were very messed up from it."
Yeah, it's kind of undoing.
You don't hear of those stories very much, but he said that it's very dangerous, and it will enhance whatever is already in you.
Right.
So if you haven't come to terms with a lot of your own issues through other means that might be gentler, it can be a rough ride.
And that's a lot of people look to it for that. Like, oh, this will solve all my things. And it sounds like that is not what you need for this to do. Yeah.
I'm not saying it can't be helpful, because I have heard it it has been, but tread lightly.
Yeah, I've seen both
Handle
things
with
go.
care.
Yes, absolutely. I've seen both results from that with friends of ours who are. Some have had good experiences, and many I'm like, oh no, you think you had a good experience, but I know you now, and you definitely didn't.
Well, I've had good experiences with the more gentle hallucinogens, and bad experiences with the not so gentle, and that was a long time ago.
So when you first went to New York, had you developed an idea of what it was like from seeing it in television and stuff? Because there was
I had, and I actually remember saying this in an interview back in the 90s, was it, with Buzz magazine? And then when I did the Conan O'Brien show backstage, or after the show, no, before, after, whenever it was, off camera, Andy Richter said to me, I always remember what you said about New York, that your impression, that it, because he said it really stayed with him, because that was his impression too. But my first impressions from New York came from television, from shows like What's My Line and The Today Show, and all these game shows where you had all these very sophisticated writers and people from the New York stage.
Oh yeah.
Showing off their wit on these shows, and that was what New York was. But the quote Andy Richter was referring to is that my impression of New York really first came from Candid Camera.
Right.
And that impression was that New York was full of people who drank a lot of coffee and played dirty tricks on each other. And when I got to New York, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah. Alan Funt has really framed the way New York is. I think I remember reading an interview with you too, where you said you had watched American Family and the Loud Family documentary,
yes.
And that also was kind of one of the reasons that you either wanted to go to New York.
It was, it made a really strong impression because it was real. There were people speaking like real people, not like actors.
People didn't write their work. It was the first basically reality show for people who don't know it.
And Lance was so fun and such a dynamic personality, and he was interested in the things that I was also interested in as a teenager, although I think I was 4 years younger than him and Christian Hoffman. But watching them go to Paris and go to New York, stay at the Chelsea Hotel, and go see Jackie Curtis, I believe, maybe even Candy Darling in production at the Club 82. And that was a club I read about in Cream and Circus magazine. I was very interested in what was going on in New York in the glam rock scene, which then mutated into the punk scene. And whether it was specifically the catalyst for going to New York, it certainly presented the concept that New York was the place interesting people like Lance and Christian and Jackie Curtis and all these other people were, but also all the people I'd watched on the Today Show, because they always featured musical numbers from the new musical West Side Story. That was one of my earliest memories, is seeing that in black and white. And Barbara Walters was broadcast from New York. Everything that was artistic was broadcast live from New York.
Yeah, the highbrow stuff was New York. Yeah,
and the Oscars had, I think that maybe by the time I was cognitive enough to watch the Oscars, they weren't being
I think they moved in the 50s.
Yeah, but my mother actually spent her early years in New York, in Queens, growing up in Queens. Her mother, my grandmother, was from West Virginia, and they spent all the summers at a farm in northern West Virginia. My mother, when she was very young, had the impression that it was always summer in West Virginia. But she moved to West Virginia when she was a teenager. But she was very much interested in the goings-on in New York and the literary goings-on. My grandfather was a newspaper man.
Okay.
So he was very plugged into, and my mother studied journalism, so she was interested in all that heady stuff.
Right.
And had that on the television. If there was ever anything like that being specially broadcast, Well, the TV was always on.
Yeah, it was always on.
But
yeah.
we made a special point of sitting down and watching that.
Because the thing that fascinates me about those, even the game shows, but the talk shows and everything from that era, is the mixture of people they'll have on the stage.
yeah.
And it'll be like, here's Orson Bean and Truman Capote and Donovan. Like, it'll just be a very strange mixture of people that would never probably interact.
Mike Douglas was good for that.
Yes, yeah.
And the afternoon talk shows, and Dick Cavett, of course. But Steve Allen, the Steve Allen Show, I loved that because he had such a kooky sense of humor. And my dad, they watched The Tonight Show and Jack Parr and all that stuff. And my dad had a very big laugh. And one of the biggest laughs that came out of him was when Gore Vidal would show up on Johnny Carson or any of these shows and, give it to the right-wingers. My dad was a Democrat. But that got my attention. Well, Dad's laughing that loud. This guy needs to be paid attention to. So I became an instant Gore Vidal fan because of seeing him on television.
Right. Which is crazy that guy was on The Tonight Show.
Yes.
Like, I read Myra Breckenridge is on The Tonight Show. I can't even think of who an equivalent person would be now, but I couldn't imagine them being on the Jimmy Fallon show.
Well, I remember, and I think I might have been a teenager by then, but I remember specifically Gore Vidal saying on the Johnny Carson show, he said, well, this really isn't, this government we've got is really the cosmetic government. There's a real government going on, and that's the
corporations in the shadows.
I don't know if he used the word military-industrial complex, but the fact he actually, for that moment on mainstream television in front of the entire country said, what's really going on is not the real thing. There's this other thing going on. And I went, what? I might have been even like 12.
Which is not a message you heard ever from a mainstream thing at that time. I mean, now I think people are sort of, their senses are a little bit deadened by conspiracy theory type stuff. But for that kind of message to come out, I mean, that's...
Right. Well, I also grew up watching the Vietnam War on TV and all the Vietnam protesters and television, TV news gave full coverage to all of that. Nothing was censored then. So you saw what was really going on, and I was extremely interested in the Berrigan brothers burning their draft cards. And why was that Buddhist monk setting himself on fire to protest? Why do they do that? And this stuff was constantly being fed to us
during dinner time.
Yes, with the spaghetti.
Yeah, it was crazy
you're watching dead bodies and number of Viet Cong killed, number of Americans killed, and then this stuff interwove with so and so's son was killed in Vietnam, and you're like, what? And so all of this is going on at the same time you're watching Leave It to Beaver.
Right.
And I'm still kind of sorting through all of this information. And it does come out in dreams.
Yeah.
And by studying Jung more intensely and starting to try to write a memoir or little selections from my life, one realizes that all of this information, and it's happening with people with the internet more intensely, probably too much information.
Yeah.
All of this has programmed us in ways that we're not really fully aware of.
Yeah, I think that the boomer generation was that first generation raised on TV, and when you look at the art that you created and the people that were in the scene you were in created, it had that. There was a lot of mid-century kind of stuff in there, and that atomic age stuff that fit in, and looking at it in a different way, and that stuff had a profound effect on me growing up because it really filtered that stuff through a completely different lens that was not possible before because you couldn't sort of revisit those things and review them in that way, which was really fascinating because it was that. The Leave It to Beaver, this is perfect, and then, whoa, how can this exist in the same world like you just said, with people literally setting themselves on fire?
Right. I think Club 57 was definitely a place where that kind of exorcism was going on. And I didn't even fully know that. I kind of knew it a little bit, but I think it was either Kwang Chi or Dan Friedman who saw it as an exorcism and was quoted saying that in a book called Art After Midnight, very good book that Stephen Hager wrote about that scene. And the MoMA show will be excavating what we were excavating and how we were refiltering it and representing it in different art forms, whether it was film, video, and theater, and recreations of these things. And I think I'm going to be writing a essay about all of this.
Oh, great.
And I've been thinking about it more and more, and I think it does have Jungian underpinnings. The fact that the club was in a basement of a church.
Yeah.
There was a subterranean element that is always an element of deep Jungian dreams, and a group, a primal group.
You were all kind of brought together too. None of the people were like native New Yorkers, right? Wasn't it kind of?
There were some that were native New Yorkers, but everybody got together in a very much like an alchemical act of synchronicity, drawn in by the Monster Movie Club, which Tom Scully and Susan Hannaford started and really created the basis of the ethos for the club, as well as many other people who are too numerous to mention.
Right. So that was like a Monday night they would show.
That was Tuesday night.
B movies or something. Everyone
they showed horror films, and then they also showed many other films. And Tom was a DJ, and he put parts of his record collection in the jukebox, which was kind of like the fire, you know.
Right.
It was a bit like Burning Man. It had a lot of the same elements that Burning Man has. And at actually one point we even burned. Somebody was burning their models that we were making. There was a night called the Model World of Glue, and I had to pour water all over them, and water because they wouldn't stop burning. It was very dangerous. And then the guy's girlfriend threw a drink in my face.
You ruined his art. Well, wasn't Keith Haring doing like poems in a TV? He was or something like that. So like this iconography of that
we were all children of TV, but also had knowledge of Warhol and Bowie was a very big influence, and all these various elements, monster movies and television, and I mentioned television, but television can't be mentioned enough, because that was, we all came from different parts of the world. It was people from all over the world came there, but we had this common vocabulary, and then we came together in a group conscience to work all of this stuff out, and I think more will be revealed in the MoMA show. But certainly, television was the guiding light. Yeah,
it becomes almost like a what's the collective unconsciousness thing, because it's you've all experienced it without even knowing, and you can have this common language with someone you've never met before, which I think people take for granted now with the internet, because they can instantly find people who've had like experiences or like interests. But then it was not like that. It was like if you had you've seen that movie, we're friends now. You've had that experience.
That was how I actually connected with Tom Scully and Susan at CBGB's, and all these people at CBGB's, and that because what drew us all there was the love of this music, and the love of that music was informed by so many of the things that we all grew up with and liked. Seeing punk rock has so much in common with so much of the inspiration came from just 3-chord rock and roll and girl groups and stuff we saw in Shindig and American Bandstand and Where the Action Is. That you mix in all these other things. But one point is that it actually was a very large collective unconscious. And I think now, because of the internet, that everything is so fragmented that the language isn't as common. Yeah. It's very specific now, the language, because I don't watch the same things. There's so much out there. Yeah. You can't see it all. So the language there's actually more dialects being spoken within the pop cultural landscape.
Because we would watch things we didn't even like
Yes.
as kids just because they were on, or they were between two things you liked, or
Yes.
someone in your family was their turn to pick their thing. So you'd get exposed to things
Yes,
that
exactly.
you could still speak to, and now it's easier to avoid things that you don't. It's much more efficient, I guess, for people, but you kind of can only look at stuff you already know about in a lot of
Well,
ways.
I think that's why we're in such a bad situation politically, because people become more narrow-minded. They're not exposed to other points of view. They can burrow in to their own rut.
That just reinforces.
Thanks to Fox News, but also thanks to a variety of other things. When I go back to West Virginia,
That's got to be quite a world.
no, well, I relish. I love going back. I haven't been able to go back. This is the first year in my entire life I haven't been back for
Wow.
a year. I felt it was very important to always go back because A, the place is beautiful.
Yeah.
Except for the mountaintop removal.
Yeah.
The people are very down to earth for the most part. I have intense, I will always have this connection to the place.
Yeah, it's where you come from.
And I do, and it keeps me in check it keeps me connected to things that are real. The things that are. There's this whole group of people who don't care what's going on during the Oscars,
Right.
for the most part. They don't care what's
Or even know that it's on.
They don't care what's going on in the more hip, corridors of New York
Right.
and Los Angeles. And you realize, okay, the world is a very, very big place with many, many different points of view, and it's important to remember that and not get trapped in these little corners.
Which is easier to do now than ever.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
and that's happened politically, and it's why there's a lot of hate. And Jung talks about this. It's very important in Jungian therapy to not get myopic.
Right.
So I feel blessed that I was able to be exposed to so many different things and different points of view. So when I go back to West Virginia, and I usually stay with Mrs. Jung,
Oh, nice.
who watches Fox News.
I bet. Yep.
And and reads the National Review and
Yep.
has a very, very
Rush Limbaugh's on at noon. And
well, yeah, she doesn't like him.
Okay.
I don't know. No, I don't know. I shouldn't put words into her mouth because she's specific about what she likes, and it's not on all the time. Thank God. But when it's on, it allows me to see, just to practice my own tolerance levels.
Right.
Because I think it's really important that we continue to, that we don't hate.
Right.
We don't hate. I can strongly disagree, and I do, but I don't discuss it with her. Because it's a really we have an old-fashioned relationship, is that you don't really discuss politics and
Right.
religion.
No
Although
politics,
we do. But I find that it's been a wonderful way for me to find the common ground, because I love this woman, and I'm not going to let. And I love many of the people in West Virginia, and I won't let our differing points of view taint them.
Yeah, you're okay with shades of gray. I think everything
Yeah.
needs to be black and white now.
And I grew up that
Yeah.
way because we grew up with people. I saw my parents being friends with people who were Democrats and Republicans could still be friends. We
Yeah.
all went to school. You didn't really. That wasn't your common ground.
Right.
You found your common ground, which was not about hating this group or that
Right.
group or feeling.
It wasn't about us winning, it was about them losing, is what changed. And I think everyone wanted to get to a better place, but just had different ideas on how to get there. And now the places are different places, it seems like. Or
And going back to television, there was a tone that, the older people set. That was one of dignity, intelligence, objectivity.
Yeah.
Journalism actually still believed in objectivity.
you did research.
Yes, you did research. You did not bring in opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Opinion was not substituted for news. Walter Cronkite would not have allowed that, and
And I think that came from a couple different things where a lot of those people came from a different world pre-television. They came from a written world. And the news people you have now come from a world who grew up on television and entertainment. So that's the language they're using instead of adapting a different skill into television.
The world is less intellectual and more focused on visuals and youth.
I blame my sort of sports hating theory is I blame the rise of televised national sports as part of it, because that started in the early 70s. And that's when you start to see this really, I mean, there are obviously a bunch of other factors as well, but you start to see this very much us versus them political sort of winner and loser type approach. And I may again just be because I'm like, sports, but I look at the kind of people that have that mentality, and they really do look at, a political campaign as the same as like the Red Sox versus Yankees, and with the same sort of like rage.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but these are very different outcomes for us all here.
Well, I remember sports being on television a lot then, but there was a balance. There was so much other stuff that was more intelligent and dignified and adult.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Was not a dirty word. Mature.
Yeah.
There was a maturity in the presentation of television and news television.
It was a respectful for the viewer almost. It wasn't like, we're going to give you what you deserve. It was kind of
Well, I think one of the problems is when the writer's strike happened, they just discovered, or the producers discovered, well, we don't need writers. We don't need original, intelligent material.
That's a lot of work.
Not that all of it was intelligent, and most probably wasn't original, but we'll just do these reality television shows, and that's what really switched things over.
Yeah, and that's been a profound difference in the last 15 years.
Yeah.
That really, again, I think people, when you look at stuff from even the late 90s, it's so much slower and different, and compared to stuff that flies now with, even the news with 18 tickers and all kinds of stuff, it's an overload.
Well, we got rid of television in 2008, and my husband did not grow up with TV. They had a TV for 1 year when they moved to this house, and there was already a TV there. And his dad said, well, we can keep it as long as it works. And then it worked for about a year, and then it broke.
Then they didn't care. They were just
that year of television, he knows all of those shows.
And that's all he needs. He's like, I got my year. That's all I need to do.
Well, we didn't have a common language. And I have had a great deal of fun turning him on to all sorts of things.
Yeah.
He never watched movies either, so they didn't have TV. Very rarely. He had never seen Citizen Kane.
Wow.
He had never seen The Wizard of Oz. He had never seen Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. And I just went to town with my own personal film festival.
Right.
And loved turning him on to this stuff, and as well as TV shows.
Right. What are some of the first ones that you were like, you got to see this, this, and this?
Probably the Beverly Hillbillies.
Really?
Which I still think is one of the most genius. That is American satire at its very best. It skewers the American class system, Hollywood, economics, everything. It is so brilliant. The acting is great. The writing is great. It gets kind of surreal, although the surrealism doesn't really come into full force until Green Acres.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, I instantly thought of Green Acres, and the episode I was thinking of is where they do the opening credits on on the towel and the jacket, and they're commenting on television.
Yes.
Or when Arnold Ziffel gets drafted.
I actually had a whole section about that in a show I did in West Virginia last year called An Evening of Sur-rualism. So I call it sur-rualism,
Right.
which is my favorite kind of surrealism that I grew up with in West Virginia, with characters like Hazel Adkins, although I didn't really find out about him till later, but just all the preachers on TV, on the radio in particular, but all the stuff I was exposed to. I like this stuff that comes out of the woods.
Yeah.
Maybe that's also horror films.
Oh, yeah. And it's a little more pure in a weird way, because there's no, like, agenda or just this single-minded. Yeah, you get, like...
There's something very primal about it.
Snake handlers.
Yeah, snake handlers. Strychnine. Somebody was always dying of a snake bite or drinking strychnine while I was growing up.
Yeah.
And my grandfather was a Swedish evangelist, but I didn't know him. He died before I was born. My grandmother was very big influence on me. My paternal grandmother, Grandma Magnuson, who made all these crazy dolls.
Oh, that are on the cover of the record?
One of is on the cover of Dream Girl, my new CD, which you can go to annmagnuson.com.
Yes, it's very good. I have a copy. I very much enjoy it. But your work, too, I mean, early 80s, I think it was, although I think I saw it later, maybe on Cinemax. You did like a short movie that was kind of like channel surfing.
It was called Made for TV.
Yeah.
I did it with the video artist Tom Rubnitz, who has since passed away. And that was me playing characters that were on television during the course of a regular programming, like the old school.
Yeah.
When there wasn't programming during the evenings. So it starts in the morning and it goes throughout the night until the very end when the Star Spangled Banner played.
Which always was weird to me. Rachel, my wife, is from England. She asked me that too. Like, why is it so patriotic that they're like signing off? It was always a very patriotic. I never really thought about it.
Well, everything was patriotic.
Yeah.
I grew up saying the Pledge of Allegiance with my hand over my heart to the flag every morning. And I think we used to have a prayer too.
Wouldn't surprise me.
I don't think it didn't do anything too bad to me.
No.
But that's because, you didn't. You were also taught that it was very important to have a separation of church and state.
Right.
You had really good American history and civics classes.
Yeah. You actually learned things in school.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was the first thing I remember watching that you had done that I was like, oh, I think this is a child of television. It was very well observed, and, this is a person who...
Well, at the end, the channels just get more and more frenetic, and you see a bleary-eyed woman turn the channel like, bleh. I had to weave some gold out of the straw that had been infiltrating my brain.
They were processing. You'd mentioned Bowie earlier, and was The Hunger the first time you had met him, or was that...
Oh, yeah.
That must have been incredibly intimidating, or if you...
It was, but he was was a very charming person.
Yeah.
And very good at making people feel right at home.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So, and it was right at the beginning of the shoot, so he had a real enthusiasm, I think, for everything, but for that, we're starting and we're doing this great
movie.
thing.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And he was very, very friendly, flirtatious, as was part of his personality, and that was a real thrill.
Oh, I can imagine. I mean,
I'm hoping to I'll write about that.
Oh, yes, please do. I'd like to read that. And when you were in this scene at that time, were you aware of how sort of monumental the stuff was, or were you kind of just taking it like, this is just a group of friends and this is what we do? Because, I mean, so much of modern culture as the sort of two touchstones are that like late 70s, early 80s New York and, the early to mid 80s LA.
No, I was aware. Or maybe the proper answer is yes, I was aware of that it was a special group of people doing cool things.
Right.
I knew that when I got to New York and found my tribe, and the same when I came to LA in the mid-'80s, because I had lived in London in it was from about August 76 to June 77.
It's a good time to be there.
Yeah, I was doing my junior year abroad. But the punk rock scene was so insular there.
Yeah.
And England it was a very depressing place. Very depressing at the time. And not hospitable to Americans.
Yeah.
I think it was very hard to get in with any kind of a group. It was hard for me. I felt alienated for so many different reasons. And one of them was because my parents had just gotten divorced, or got divorced while I was gone.
That happened to me when I lived in England.
Really?
Yeah.
And there were a lot of factors that played into an intense sense of alienation that I had.
I can only imagine. I mean, I lived there in the early 2000s, and it was still somewhat grim and a bit like that. I can only imagine, during they were having 4-day work weeks and garbage strikes, and there was a real turmoil.
Oh, yeah, it was depressing. It was a depressing time. I went to see a lot of movies.
Yeah.
I got a moped, and I was on that thing. I skipped a lot of classes, but I
Same.
went to enough
Yeah.
that I went to the ones that mattered.
I was at the Prince Charles and the Scala a lot, which did a lot of revival stuff in the time.
Well, I went to a lot of movies. I went to galleries. I went to museums. I went to theater. The one great thing is that I had this student pass that got me into the National Theater and the Royal Shakespeare Company for, I think, £1.
Yeah.
And I would just show up at the last minute, and there'd be a seat like right in the front. And I saw unbelievable productions. So I fed myself. I gorged on culture,
Right.
which I had to because I was so alienated.
Right. What else were we going to do?
But I was also a little, really, a bit of a hick from West Virginia who had while I'd been exposed to a lot of these things through television and the cultural programming that my mother made sure that we watched and that I wanted to watch, and also a lot of the books and the films that I saw growing up, read and saw. My own interest.
Just sort of the belly of the beast there. I mean,
It was a kid in a candy store.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, I can do this and this and this and this.
Yeah.
So but I also was very depressed by the class system there.
Yes.
It was
It's
so
very, very different than here.
so oppressive. It was not what I thought. I didn't know what to think. I didn't really
Yeah.
know what to expect. I went in pretty blind and naive, excited by the culture that I was exposed to,
Right.
but really shocked by the class system and how clear it was that wherever you were stuck there.
Yep.
And watching the punk rockers emerge from that, talk about turning like
Oh, yeah.
gold out of hay. Very, very much of an alchemical, what Jung talks about, an alchemical process of taking one's troubles and turning them around
Right.
in art and in this process of individuation. I watched it happen. I watched it from the get-go because at the very beginning when I got there, it was late August, Blondie and the Ramones had just been there, and the posters were all over. And you slowly started to see these kids emerge,
Yep.
dressed like them, but then they did their own thing with it.
Yeah. They were
And it was
almost like preachers that
it was
were
a
like
lot
converting.
more extreme, and it got more extreme and more extreme, and I loved watching it. I'll have to show you when we're done this it's not really a poster, but it's kind of like a poster from the Evening Standard, which was one of the tabloids. British tabloids just took a hold
Oh, yes.
of that punk rock
Yep.
scene, and which Malcolm McLaren knew and worked, and I also got to see how like the media in England was so much different than America, and you could think people could become stars like immediately if they
Yep.
played controversy.
It was so much smaller.
Yes.
Stuff spread so quickly.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I pulled this poster that said "Second Sex Pistol Knifed." The Evening Standard, because they were always getting jumped,
Yeah.
Sex Pistols, by these yobs.
Yeah, it was dangerous. I mean, I
Very
think
dangerous,
If you walked
very
down the street
violent.
like that, people would just come up and hit you. It was
I remember coming out of the tube station around Trafalgar Square, around there, walking up Regent Street at the same time that this soccer game
Oh,
had
God.
finished, and
Yeah.
yes, I remember the train was full of soccer fans who were really drunk.
yeah.
And I remember coming out of the tube station and walking up Regent Street and being in the middle of this crazy, like suddenly I saw these guys run like I've never seen men run in my
Yeah.
life. I'd never seen anybody run like that. And then they were followed by these hooligans, very much out of A Clockwork Orange.
Yeah.
And one of the hooligans picked up one of these men working.
Oh, like the horses things, or
Yeah, it wasn't. It was sort of like a horse. It was one of the little triangles they set
oh
down.
yeah.
And pick it up, but it was made out of metal.
Yeah.
And go chasing after these guys, and I just backed up against the
Yeah.
against the wall and watched this crazy, violent thing happening, which is I'd never seen anything like that.
Yeah, it was a boiling over, too, of all that. One of the things that struck me profoundly when I lived there was how adversely affected England was from World War II, whereas America used it as an asset. We were like, no, we have all this money, we're going to build, and everything's new. And England was still, even when I was in there in the 2000s, the college I went to still had bombed out things from World War II that weren't fixed.
Yes.
And they were on rationing till the 60s almost, I think, right? Or almost late 50s or something.
So when I actually stayed in London a little longer, to connect up to why I felt that what was going on in New York in the late 70s did have meaning, even while we were doing it, was because of these experiences in London. And I stayed a little longer than I probably should have there. And I tried to get a job, and there was no way to make any money.
Yeah.
I was so dirt poor there.
Yeah.
I was dirt poor in New York, but I didn't mind it as much.
Yeah.
But in London, it was so depressing. So by the time I got to New York and fell in with the people who later became my closest friends and cohorts, I was so hungry to be part of something that had meaning in a group. And when it happened, it was so clear this was what it was. And then the little cherry on top of the story is while I was at CBGB's, where I met a lot of the people who then we went on to do Club 57. I remember being at CB's one night, and it was not very crowded. It was one of those off nights. I mean, we were there every single night.
Right.
So I was there one night, hanging out near the pinball machines, and in walks Sid and Nancy. This was just a little bit before he died.
Yeah.
She died.
Yeah.
First, then he died. What was that? That had to be 78.
Because they were living in the Chelsea Hotel then.
We'll have to look at.
Yeah, it was probably 78.
We'll have to Google it.
Yeah. Now that we can. Yeah,
but I will never forget when they walked in. It was like it was like somebody threw a spotlight on them.
Right.
They just glowed from how white and pasty their skin was. And her peroxided white hair, his dark dyed black hair, and what they were wearing, and their iconography just bounced off of them like sunlight from the moon. It was trippy. I will never forget it. I can see it right now.
Which now people wouldn't look twice at. People coming in somewhere dressed like that, like you played Lillian Munster in one of the Munster things, but the funny thing that strikes me is, someone could dress like Lillian Munster walking down Sunset Boulevard, and people kind of wouldn't even think twice about it these days, to a degree.
Well, I remember when people were walking around like that in London, and it made the establishment people so angry.
Yeah.
And watching that was such a treat. And I would see fights on the London bus. And by people who weren't even punk rockers, just between the older people and the younger people. And my impression of the English was that they were these prim and proper, very polite.
Oh, no.
And when they got in these fights, it just blew my mind.
Yeah. I had The Damned on the show. And,
oh, my God. I saw them in Bristol in 1979.
Oh, that would have been the amazing time to see them.
In a pub.
Oh, they're probably my favorite punk band, and the reason I moved to England was I saw them on the Young Ones in 1985, and I was like,
the Young Ones was England when I was there.
Yeah, I think that's what I wanted when I went there. I was like, this is exactly what I want.
Maybe you wanted it, but to be in it,
miserable.
It was such a dead end time.
Yeah,
it was such a dead end.
It must have felt apocalyptic.
It was apocalyptic, and that's why punk rock had to occur. Do you know the writer Nick Kent?
Yes.
Oh, he wrote a memoir about the 70s that is a must-read. He captured that perfectly, and he really follows the trajectory of punk rock, starting with Jesus, with the Rolling Stones. His father took him to see the Rolling Stones when he was 12 or something. And then he went to find Lester Bangs when he was 14.
As you do, of course, yeah.
No parent would let their 14-year-old go to another country.
Right, to find a writer that they like. Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting hearing, talking to Dave especially, about who now, he was dressed like with a monocle and like dresses now, and I'm like, oh, people wouldn't even think twice about that. But when I look at, there's a great documentary about them called Don't You Wish That We Were Dead that came out last year.
Oh, I've got to see that.
It's really good. And there's footage from about 77, 78, and he looks like a vampire, like an actual monster.
Remember that.
And I'm like, people walking down the street, you are dressed like a monster, and they're probably going to react accordingly. Like, it was probably terrifying to like some.
Oh yeah, in the beginning there weren't very many of them, and I saw a lot of them. I remember being at the Kilburn tube station waiting for a train with a group of them. That was because none of them worked, and I didn't. Oh, yeah. I was just traveling all over the place at all hours, except late because everything closed.
Yeah, so 5 o'clock.
But I remember very specifically being at the Kilburn High Street Station, I think that's the name of it, with a group of them. One of them was Sue Catwoman.
Wow.
And I remember at the very beginning, their looks were pretty simple. Yeah. And it got more complex as the months rolled on.
They were trying to outdo each other.
I think they got bolder because they could be in bigger groups.
Right. That would make sense. And then that all sort of culminated with the Bill Grundy thing when Sue Catwoman and Susie Sue and all them showed up with the...
I did not see that at the time, but I collected all these tabloids, and a lot of them were lost in the mail when I was sending them back. Except for the one I'll show you.
Right, yeah, I can't wait to see that. Yeah.
And the newspapers were just full of it every day. It was very entertaining.
Yeah.
And I loved, what they were doing, but I also knew from being in school prior to going to London and collecting Blondie and Richard Hell records and the Ramones that it all started in New York.
Yeah. It was a British.
But like all of rock and roll, which started in the South.
Yeah.
And when it goes to England, they
change it a little bit.
They wave their very special magic wand and turns it into something even more special, and then they export that back.
Right.
And the back and forth that goes on is really dizzying.
It keeps escalating. Mm-hmm. So then it was so strange to be aware of you being in these sort of youth culture art movement things, and then to see you in very sort of mainstream comedies like Anything But Love and the Munsters and sort of stuff, and it was really cool to see that. Was that strange sort of kind of crossover to that other side of a...
That kind of happened by serendipity, really. Although I have always been a very practical person. I got that from my dad. Seriously practical. I got the fantasy, magical thinking stuff from my mom, but my dad was super practical, and I got bored being so poor. Yeah. Not bored, but it's hard. Yeah. It's rough. And my dad was really explicit. He was not going to help my brother and I at all. Now, he didn't have really any money either. Everything was on credit in the 60s. So you could live a comfortable middle-class life, but it was all on credit.
Yeah, you were horribly in debt, but you had a comfortable
life. I never really understood that till much later. I just thought my dad was withholding.
Yeah. Well, you have these things. I don't understand,
Yeah, but no, he was very, very careful in how he parceled out money. But he also had this fear. I think I've heard this from other people. That generation had a fear of spoiling their children. Yeah. They went the other direction. They got very harsh. Yeah. So I had an interesting point of view about money. I knew you had to be really frugal. No one was going to help you. This doesn't help with your self-esteem much.
I imagine, yeah.
But it does kind of make you very self-reliant. Right. So I knew that really the only way to make any money by being a a fantasy weaver, a dream weaver.
Right.
Was in the world of show business and getting a proper job and getting to join the Screen Actors Guild, therefore getting health insurance.
Right.
And luckily a pension. So I was always on a practical track in that way, and that I pursued those things as they came my way. I did not pursue them aggressively at the beginning because I worked my work-study program after I came back from London in school. I spent a semester back at Denison University in Ohio, and I was interested in being a theater director and a movie maker, so I did all those things. But I thought, I got to get out of this place.
Yeah.
Time to go to New York. I'm ready now. London prepared me. I'm not as afraid of New York. So I went to New York for my last semester of senior year, which meant I spent 3 semesters off campus, which no one is allowed to do
Right.
now. But the 70s were much more
A little more free time, yeah.
lax period. And I worked at the Ensemble Studio Theater, which was a much more traditional theater than I wanted to work at. But it taught me that I didn't really want to be in the uptown theater world.
Right.
But I got a lot of practical skills and a lot of knowledge. And I spent all my evenings at CBGB in Texas, Kansas City, and that's where I met all those people.
Right.
And then wanted to do what I really wanted to do was more alternative forms of theater. While doing that, I performed as well because I did that as a kid. So I was in productions and in these sort of alternative theater envirotechs we created, and got in some underground films. Beth and Scott B.
Yep. I think Mondo, New York, you show up in doing a...
Yeah, I was in a variety of things, and one thing led to another, and Susan Seidelman put me in Desperately Seeking Susan,
Right.
and then it got to... there was Sleepwalk before that by Sarah Driver, and it was shot by Jim Jarmusch, and then Making Mr. Right came out of that. And
which was a very mainstream movie.
yes, and then Anything But Love came out of that,
Right.
and then I came out here because of a lot of reasons, but one was, this is where I could start, building up a nest egg by getting work in TV and films. But I always used that money to do my own stuff, and it gave me the freedom to do all these other things that were decidedly uncommercial, like Bong Water, and a variety of other things. And I did that. I really worked as a legitimate, quote unquote, actress to help finance this other life as an artist.
But you still did good stuff. Like, it wasn't like you were doing... I mean, like Anything But Love, I had
some of it was... that was good. That was a great part. I was very picky. In fact, I turned down things that I look back now and like, oh, God. Boy, was I naive and arrogant and... I turned down so much stuff because it wasn't cool. And most of it wasn't.
Well,
but I realized I had a very, very small window of opportunity when these things were going to be offered to me.
But you don't know that at the time.
No, not really.
Yeah.
I wasn't that dumb, but in hindsight, I realized I was more grandiose.
Yeah. Well, no,
than I should have been.
Oh, believe me, I have the same issue with... I turned down a lot of comedy stuff that I probably shouldn't. So the fall preview, as you said, you kind of really gravitated towards there. And I think, what year is that? 1971 maybe, or 72? I think it would be on the top of the thing.
September 11th or the 17th. Yeah. And where do they even have the years?
So it's usually on the top in the print section. They'll have it like right along the top.
71.
71, yeah.
This was a year where I was probably in between, I was starting puberty, so I probably wasn't as into TV at night as I was listening to records.
When music starts to become sort of your individual thing that you can do on your own.
Yeah. However, I was still watching TV, no doubt about it.
Yeah. So would you kind of make notes? Let's look at what's in the fall preview piece there. Let's see if there's any shows that were starting that year that really jumped out to you or anything.
I was looking at... I would read all of these changes.
Oh, yeah. The writing was actually very good in TV Guide, too. They have a lot of predictive technology writing in there. That's crazy. I have one from 57 that predicts flat screen HD TVs. But it says by 1977 we'll have them, so it's a little bit off time-wise. But
I love the ads, too.
Oh, yeah.
Because, like, chicken soup. Campbell's Chicken Soup. They're We had it almost every day.
Yeah, and that ad looks like a Warhol piece of art, but is an actual ad.
Well, the pop artist didn't have to go too far.
Right. And it's funny, 71's like such a transitional year because you're seeing a lot of things in there. Like there's still some new Westerns that are coming out.
Yes.
That hadn't quite died yet. And people forget that like Westerns were the quintessential genre forever and ever. And,
yes.
And now I think we still kind of have them, but they're, The Walking Dead is a Western or, they're basically the same thing.
I think those are serial killer movies more than Westerns or
they're
anything
very
else.
grim and everyone is
I
just,
can't stand. I watched some on the plane. I'm like, this is horrific.
Yeah.
No wonder we're in the state we're at.
Yeah.
By the way, speaking of Westerns, Gene Barry as Bat Masterson was my first TV crush.
Was he the master of the whip, Bat Masterson? I think that was his...
No, he was I think he was like a riverboat gambler, like Maverick with a cane.
Yes. Yeah, and that's a show now that like you couldn't get a little girl to watch a Western about a guy named Bat Masterson now. It was like that was on.
I loved him.
Yeah. Westerns were huge, and the variety show thing is just sort of kicking off here. I think on the specials page.
I looked through the new shows, and none of them really grabbed me. I think I was less interested.
I think none of them lasted.
But the specials, I was into that.
What did we have there?
Well, I was still watching, I don't know when, the Bowie stuff didn't really happen until 73, 74, when the Midnight Special, and that stuff. But Julie Andrews and Carol Burnett, I think I would watch, my parents would have watched these things. Ed Sullivan.
Was there anything they were like, you're not allowed to watch this, it's too adult?
Not on television. In fact, I remember when the movie In Cold Blood played, my mother was very into the series that was in the New Yorker, the serial that Truman Capote did. She actually, I remember telling me, she would wait for the mailman to get the next one.
Wow.
It was that gripping. So when the TV version, which I don't think they'd ever seen, was playing on TV, we all sat down as a family to watch it.
In Cold Blood together.
And I was really traumatized by it. I would never have let a child watch that. I told her that at one point. She goes, I'm sorry.
Well, there was probably an idea, too, that if it's on TV, it's okay. Someone approved it.
Well, that was actually an example of, both my parents exposed us to pretty heady stuff, more adult stuff. I think parents did that for their children.
You didn't try to protect them as much from everything. I think that's
we were not allowed to see James Bond movies, and I was not allowed to go see Bonnie and Clyde.
Okay.
The movies.
So sort of the Bonnie and Clyde I get.
The sex was in the James Bond movies, and Bonnie and Clyde was too violent. Yeah,
and also was making heroes out of the...
However, I remember Marshall Jones, back to the Joneses, we often had movie birthdays, so you go to see a movie as part of your birthday, and then have a little party afterwards. So I remember for his birthday, we were all going to see the latest James Bond movie, and we were not allowed to go see it. So instead, they had to choose a different movie. So instead, we went to see Chamber of Horrors.
Oh, that's totally better than that.
Far more violent. But again, it was, I think, because he was such a womanizing sex addict kind of
bad
cad.
Yes, yeah. When you finally saw those movies, were you like, oh, this is nothing? Because I've found a lot of things. My parents didn't have a lot of rules, but the few things they said I wasn't allowed to watch when I finally got around to watching them as an adult, when I was like, this is going to be the dirtiest movie ever. I'm like, oh, this what?
I don't remember that. I just remember, I don't know, I really liked the James Bond movies, but I think I really watched those until around the Club 57 era, when they were on TV, and then they just became this... They were more science fiction to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the gadgets were what I always loved in those movies. Yeah,
I loved science fiction movies and TV shows. Loved them. Time Tunnel.
Yep. All the Irwin Allen stuff.
The Outer Limits.
Land of the Giants.
Yes, that wasn't as gripping as some of the other ones. Oh, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea.
Yes, yep.
I remember when I met Alexandra Hedison when she was dating Ellen DeGeneres.
Oh, wow.
And I said... oh, I have to tell you, I always had a big crush on your dad. Because I hear that a lot.
Was there anyone else that you watched on these shows as a kid that you met later or worked with later that you were just totally flustered by, or like?
Oh yeah, lots. In fact, I there's some people I just couldn't talk to when I had the opportunity to talk to them because they're just too iconic. One was Dick Van Dyke.
I bet, yeah.
But it was at the there was a anniversary distribution of Mary Poppins that I went to, and I actually talked to the surviving Berman brother.
Oh yeah.
And I started crying, telling him how much the music meant.
And it probably really surprised you that you reacted that way, I imagine.
Yes.
I've had that. But
when Dick Van Dyke was just right there, and I could have gone up to him, and I thought, oh, I can't. I was crying with the songwriter. I thought, I can't.
It'll be too much.
I'm too overwhelmed. I can't. Well, when I met and worked with John Ritter, that was a real joy. I was not a Three's Company fan. In fact, I kind of thought it was too square.
Yeah, I imagine, especially the time that was on and where you were at then.
This was a big lesson I learned by being in show business and having proximity to some, and getting to work with a variety of kinds of people, that the people I thought were really cool and prestigious often turned out to be the assholes. And the people you didn't think were cool were the best people ever. I kind of learned that lesson when I was in 7th grade or 6th grade, and I wasn't popular with the popular girls, and then I became friends with them, really close friends with them in 7th grade. And I realized that you can't gauge, like you can't take any of that seriously. I don't know if I really took it to heart as much as I was able to do later when you're older and wiser.
I'm sure it connected back. You're like, oh, that's the lesson I learned.
It's the same, but it was the same thing, meeting him and Mark Harmon. I worked with him on From the Earth to the Moon. Now, I never really had feelings about Mark Harmon one way or the other, just that he was more of a mainstream. Yeah,
well, he was Time Magazine's Sexiest Man Alive, 1986.
Yeah, so, for somebody if you're hanging out with Mike Kelly, Mark Harmon isn't somebody you automatically think of being cool. But when I worked with him and John, they are really the two top cool guys in my book.
Yeah. And they've done some really, like some of the movies John Ritter did. Like, I love a movie called Real Men he did with Jim Belushi that's really bizarre about aliens running the government, but it's sort of a comedy. It's great.
I laugh so hard with John. I've never laughed that hard in my life.
Yeah.
He told us stories in the makeup room. One of them, he told stories at his first TV shows. That's the other thing, is you get to hear all these amazing stories from these people. Yeah. Chris Walken told me fantastic stories.
Oh, man, I can imagine.
And I said, you've got to write a memoir. And he said, nah, you got to write about people.
I mean, that's one of the reasons I started the show, because I was like, there's all these people who I want to read an autobiography of, and they don't have one, so I'm just going to go get it.
I love those are my favorite things to read. Yeah. I read Gene Wilder's.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think he wrote two, didn't he?
I think he did.
I read both of them. Terry Garr's. I've read it. I have so many showbiz and actor and actress memoirs from people who are very revered Shakespearean actors to Corey Feldman. Yeah. I just read his, and it's so powerful.
Yeah, that is a fascinating
my God.
Stuff. Yeah.
That's an incredible book.
Yeah.
I really admire him for getting out from underneath.
Oh, yeah. I can't even imagine.
Horrific upbringing, horrific exploitation. I will never, he should never be made fun of. People make fun of him too much. And he's a hero in my book.
Oh, yeah, that he's alive. Like, a lot of these people we laugh at their survival mechanism.
These people, we all go on the classic Jungian hero's journey, all of us. And those folks go on ones that are even more intense.
Yeah, and they're in front of everybody.
Yes.
We all have to see it. And
I think that people want to sacrifice them in a way. The making fun of is sort of some primal urge to sacrifice for blood, a need for blood sacrifice.
That's interesting.
And the trolls on the internet are showing that in spades. I did a show at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art about David Bowie and Joe Bryant. People will have to Google all this because it's way too much information. It's a whole other tangent.
I'll put it all in the notes for the show.
It's a whole other tangent, but it was called The Rock Star is which... I cannot remember the exact title. It's something like the rock star as shaman, witch doctor, and ritual sacrifice. Something like that.
Yeah.
And it was presented like a David Bowie tribute show, but then we switched gears and we Trojan horse
Right.
the story of Joe Bryant in there. And I do it like an Aztec or a Mayan Aztec blood sacrifice.
Right. That makes sense, though. I mean, it's when you're telling stories, I think people, I know people are aware that obviously there were stories before media and television and movies, but they're kind of the same stories.
Oh, they absolutely are.
So they all fit in
And the more
together.
you study myth and archetype and Jung and all of this stuff, and I wrote a very extensive piece about this for a magazine called Dinosaur, and it's not online, but it should be, I guess, but it was before Bowie passed away. I didn't know. I knew he was ill, but I didn't know he was going to go there.
Gravely ill, yeah.
But it was about him being a hermit and why I felt why he was doing that.
Right.
Obviously, it was because of health reasons, too, but I think it was also because he did not have a need to be out there anymore.
Right.
He was in the last phase of his life, which was not about... it was about being a private person.
Right.
It was about using your wisdom as a soft pillow to lie your head on. And I think my theory was that also the internet, while I know he used it, and he was probably on it under many pseudonyms, that he just he didn't want to be exposed that way.
Right. He sort of lost the control.
Control, and he was a well-known control freak. Capricorn like myself.
Yeah.
We need control. But the article really got into this idea of a sacrifice. Like, we sacrifice our celebrities. Whitney Houston, Heath Ledger, Michael Jackson, I mean, the list goes on, and they build them up to tear them down. That is a very old primal ritual that I think we still do in this new way, because we can't actually
physically
stab them and pull their heart out and show it.
Well, it's kind of culture showing them who's in charge almost. Like, we made you and we destroy you. Or there's like a desire I've found where, so many people that I know who are in the entertainment industry and have done things, and it is difficult to make money, and you're very high profile, and then, people may not have a ton of money, and people are kind of like, yeah, I knew it.
Oh, yes,
it's kind of like, but why are you, this guy just had a job, and you're like, yeah, now you don't have a job. And it's a very odd
That is a
reaction.
real central characteristic of human beings. It's a very narcissistic characteristic, and that word narcissism has really been thrown around in a very careless way.
Yeah.
It's used as a way to shame somebody, but in a very narcissistic way.
To illustrate the very
and I've
thing.
certainly we're all guilty of that, because the hallmark of narcissism is idealizing and devaluing.
Right.
And this is a very human thing that is done in order to assuage fear.
Right.
And Ernest Becker writes very brilliantly about that in The Denial of Death. And there's another psychotherapist, a clinical psychologist named Jordan Peterson, who has all his lectures on YouTube. And I encourage everybody to watch these.
Oh, I'll have to watch it.
He is amazing. We've quote unquote taken his lecture courses, watching like all 27 episodes of his lectures on YouTube, and twice, two different ones. And I was just watching some more of him today because I'm finishing up this blogs for Magnet, which
Right.
maybe you can link to those
Yeah,
later.
oh,
because
absolutely.
all this information is in there. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
actually been a real pain in the ass to write 14 blog
Oh, I can
posts.
imagine, yeah. Especially when you're like, I actually want to research these and do these right.
But it's, yes, and I've gone way more in depth and,
Yeah.
and elaborate than I needed to. But it's been really helpful for me. It's been very illuminating. A lot of the stuff I already knew, but I just got deeper into it and also able to connect the dots in
Right.
ways that connect to dreams and human psychology.
Yeah.
And Jung really gets it. And Jordan Peterson really gets Jung, and he's very articulate about it. And there's so much information out there, and Bowie really got Jung.
Oh, he was huge.
And
yeah.
he worked in a very obfuscating way, but when you start to really understand the language, you see it. And those last couple of records, and the last one in particular,
Oh, yeah.
is so painful
Yeah.
to listen to and to watch the videos for. Very painful. I can't really go there much.
Yeah.
But it's all
yeah.
there, even though he was not very. He didn't like to lay things out on the line.
Right.
But it's all laid out
Yeah.
in the language of poetry and symbols and archetypes and visuals. So the bad behavior we see on the internet is actually kind of a gift. We're seeing it really clearly.
Right.
Real clear. This presidential election it's getting
Yeah.
clearer and clearer and clearer in ways that are frightening, because if it goes over a certain edge, we get into World War
Yeah.
I and World War II,
Yeah.
because this is the shadow. This is the human shadow that we all possess. And if you don't come to terms with it, if you don't get to know your shadow, like Peter Pan.
Yeah.
Peter Pan didn't have a shadow.
Right.
Or he wasn't recognizing his shadow. So he stayed childlike, and then and you can't mature. And part of the maturation process is learning about your part in it. The 12-step programs get into this very brilliantly. And Jung helped Bill W.
Yeah.
Design that. But unless you get in touch with the negative things you're up to, you're going to project them onto other people.
Right.
And people do that because it's too painful. It's too self-annihilating psychologically to get into that part of it. So you
Right.
just project it onto other people. So the primal ritual is to project it onto literally a scapegoat.
Yeah.
Google scapegoat, just read the Wikipedia description of scapegoat, and that's what's
Yeah.
going on.
Or
It's
picture, like-
everybody's scapegoating everybody, whether it's the right-wingers scapegoating the liberals scapegoating
Yeah.
the right-wingers, we put everybody into an us versus them
Yeah.
scenario, which is an old tribal
Yep.
thing that we have not evolved out of, and that is this is great that we can talk about this. This is actually more important than talking about what I would watch on TV, although we can
But it
grab...
fits in, though, I mean, I think
completely.
that it fits in the way that television can reinforce and allow people to do that. So instead of using technology and mass media to transcend that stuff, we've sort of used it to augment that stuff or the worst aspects of those things.
Well, the stories we tell are that's our myth, that we tell these stories because that's what life is. Jordan Peterson talks about that life is not composed of matter, it's composed of meaning.
Yeah.
He even gets into the quantum physics of it, is if you start going down to the quark level, and then you're getting to the Planck scale, which they don't even know what that shit is.
Right.
But they suspect it's just frequencies.
Yeah.
It's just frequencies, which could be the stories we tell. It could
Yeah.
be that is what it, that a particle can both be a wave. No, what is it? It can be a wave or a particle.
Right.
And depending on the observer.
Yeah.
I mean, this is all more stuff than I can articulate well. Jordan Peterson does it, but you got to sift through it. I mean, not
Yeah.
sift, just expose yourself to all this incredible knowledge that is now on the internet, thank God.
Yeah, and you would have access to where you would have had to go to an Ivy League school to get that for,
Right. Right.
Sort of
And
a
this
great unifier.
this is a balance from all the crap that's on TV.
Right.
But the internet is literally the collective unconscious.
Yeah.
As everything gets uploaded onto the internet, they're all there.
And it's the summed, like the fact that we all have access to the sum total of human knowledge in our pockets right now, and we're kind of not utilizing that to fix everything, but instead are just like, I'm going to call this guy gay. It's really strange that's we have the tools.
Because we're not evolved enough.
Right.
And we're not exposing ourselves to the kinds, we're not feeding ourselves the stuff that would help us evolve. But I do it too. Like, why am I going on Daily Mail again?
Yeah.
To look at some
Gonna make
mindless
myself mad.
bullshit.
Yeah, that's what Rachel's always telling me. Like, why do you listen to the right-wing radio when you're driving around? I'm like, I kind of want to just know what they're talking about,
Oh,
so I just get angry. I'm like, but I
don't like the right-wing radio. I can occasionally check in on, and I listen to it, and my husband cannot. He just goes insane. I like the preachers, and actually John likes them too. Because they're talking the same stuff we're talking. It's just a different language.
Right.
And the guy I learned meditation from, and I took a course in the the Vedas from him. The last part involved you going to India, and I didn't take that part because I don't want to get on a plane for that long.
Yeah.
But he said well, there was sort of a thing called Rishi training, which is people who teachers.
Yeah.
And he said, a Rishi does not condemn. And we should never condemn what other people are doing during their path, like where they have to go and what they have to do. Although it's hard to not say, hey,
Right.
you know what? I am going to condemn the guy who went into the Pulse nightclub and shot everybody up. That's like not cool, folks.
That's no longer his path. He's kind of brought
you're
those
kind
in.
of ruining it for everybody else.
Yeah.
But the important part of information adjacent to that is that he said you cannot engage consciousness on a level other than where it's at. And that's why stories are told on all these different levels. All these different levels. So there's TV shows for people on all different levels, And
like the Twilight Zone of the Outer Limits. You can watch that as a monster show, or you can watch some of those things about really, really complicated, heavy psychological and metaphysical ideas. And, these are shows from 50 years ago,
right,
that are bringing up some of the very things that we're discussing here that people still don't understand.
Right. So we tell stories. Jordan Peterson says we tell stories that's what makes us who we are, but so that we can have meaning. And meaning is what we're all after.
Right.
So it gets perverted and like, well, if I'm going to hate you, that gives me meaning because
Right.
I can put you down here, I'm elevated up here, and that makes me feel less than. It's so convoluted.
It's like an equal and opposite reaction stuff. And I think that's like a lot of the people, especially when people reach out to sort of knock celebrity down, like on Twitter and that sort of stuff. It's, I'm going to keep poking the universe till I get poked back, which sort of makes me feel like I'm part of it in a weird way, even though it's a very destructive way.
It's going to say adolescent, but it's more like a toddler mentality.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a toddler mentality. I'm going to take the feces out of my diaper and throw it at you. That's what it is.
Yeah, it really is. And it's I think eventually it has to come back around. Like when we have all these tools, and I feel like people will at some point go, why are we doing nothing with this? We're utilizing these amazing futuristic tools that we could be all being bettered by for things that are making us worse. Not even not doing anything, but making us worse. We're turning into the time machine with the Eli and the whoever the fruit picking that they ate were in the time machine, and.
Oh, the Eloi.
Yeah, the Eloi
and the Morlocks.
The Morlocks, yes, they eat the Eloi, and it is very much like that in a lot of ways.
Well, those are probably the most basic archetypes there are.
Yeah, and we're sort of growing into them in a lot of ways, which is
Yes.
sort of terrifying.
Well, the other thing I learned through the Vedic course is it's not really about bad and good, heaven and hell. It's about, there's three forces at work. The creation operators, the maintenance operators, and the destruction operators. And they all three have to be in a balance.
Right.
So if there's too much maintenance, it doesn't allow creation to happen. If there's too much stasis, there's no room for creation. So the destruction operators have to come in and kind of eat away at the maintenance to allow creation. The best example of that is a forest that has gotten too wooded and nothing else can grow in it. So, lightning hits.
Right.
It burns off everything off. It's dormant, and then out of that comes new life.
Yeah, I mean that's the constant cycles that we see, and it's interesting to see where it will go given all of the things that we were talking about, how it fits into popular culture. It really is. One of the things I love about TV Guide especially is that it's made to be disposable, and it's made to be a very specific time and place and week, and they tend to be the best representations of even modern day because they weren't intended to be timeless. And so you get this snapshot. Yes. And it's kind of interesting too, and a very specific time and place that people were at that time.
Yes, well, I always sort of feel that way about art. People go on and on about sort of the timelessness of art, and I think any act of creation has that element. But on the other hand, does it need to be timeless?
No.
Can it just speak for this moment and then it's gone?
Yeah. And I always say that too about like punk rock. I'm like, that was also a time.
Oh,
It wasn't necessarily a genre or a style. It was a specific time. That always gets sort of overlooked in that thing.
That's why we need to know our history.
Yeah.
Those who do not know their history are doomed to retweet it.
Right. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure. It's been one of the best interviews I've ever had in my life.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, see, because we could have a real conversation.
Right.
Like people used to have.
Yeah, that's what I love doing. That's like, I feel like I've become a better person since I started doing this show, just because I've been able to actually talk to people, even people, new friends, new people I don't know, friends I've known for years that I've never sat down and talked to for a couple hours. It's my favorite thing I've ever done.
Well, I can't wait to hear more of them and spread the word.
Thank you. There you go. That is Ann Magnuson. As I said, amazing. Her career is so varied. Everything from Desperately Seeking Susan, Making Mr. Right, Mondo, New York. I highly recommend that Heavy Petting documentary as well. I think it's on Netflix right now, but I loved that thing. Very, very good. Just a fascinating, smart, fun, funny person. Again, can't say enough good things about Ann. And I can't say enough good things about her new record, Dream Girl. Go to annmagazine.com and purchase it. I like it very much. I think you will like it very much. In addition, if you're in a purchasing mood, I still have my album, The Vanity Project Volume 1, Hollywoodland, out. If you would like to purchase that, you can buy it from me at icanread.com or wherever fine digital music is sold. You can also email me at ken@icanread.com. That is my comedy site, or at tvguidancecounselor@gmail.com. You can go to the Facebook page, just search TV Guidance Counselor. We have new episodes every Wednesday. I usually tease them out on the Facebook page on Tuesday night, and people kind of guess who the guest will be, and that's quite a lot of fun. Also on Twitter at TV Guidance, and I am on Instagram at Kenneth W. Reed. I have not yet found a way to also have a TV Guidance Counselor Instagram account. I think that's where I'm stopping. I will not do Snapchat. I'm not doing it. Drawing the line, everybody. And if you like the show, please rate and review the show on iTunes. It is a huge help to getting the word out about the show, which is something I very much would like to do because I think it's a damn fine show. We'll see you again next week for a brand new episode of TV Guidance Counselor.
It's a gassy thing. I always blamed you and the Beatles for getting my kids in